Hi, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give a few more minutes for people to log in. Thanks. Hello, and welcome to our webinar on building an intranet business case. Thank you so much for joining us today. So my name is Kelly Backey, and I am our senior content writer here at Thought Farmer, and I am joined here today alongside Colton Thielman, who has spent hundreds of hours talking to customers and prospects about their intranet journey. Colton's actually filling in for our original speaker, Amol Gill, who you may have seen on the webinar invite. But Amol is unable to join us today because him and his wife just had a baby 4 days ago. So a very good excuse to not be joining us today. But I am still super excited to be presenting alongside Colton because he has so much wisdom to share.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I have tough shoes to fill with the mold there, but I feel like every other call I get off of, people are raving about the content we have, and of course that's all helpful. Thankful to you. It's like super helpful. So Kelly's usually behind a laptop writing content, but it's good to have you actually talk about it. So thanks, Kelly.
Thank you. And just to give everyone a little background about Thought Farmer, in case you're unfamiliar with us, we build intranet software that helps organizations improve their internal communication, collaboration, and knowledge share. We've been around since 2007, and we have customers all over the world. And you can learn more about us by visiting our website or by contacting us after the webinar. And also, we're going to try to save some time at the end of the webinar to answer some questions. If we don't get to your question, we will definitely follow up after the webinar. So the idea of this webinar actually goes back a few years ago when I wrote a white paper on the same subject. And if I recall correctly, Colton, you played a huge role in this because I remember at the time you and Amol were speaking with a lot of prospects that were trying to establish a business case for an intranet and especially trying to land stakeholder approval. So if you've never built a business case, it can feel like a tireless exercise. But it's a crucial step and necessary for educating decision makers and encouraging them to take some level of action. We are going to cover a lot of information here. So if something doesn't make sense, you can always download our white paper that dives in a lot deeper into this stuff, or you can reach out to us after the webinar. So we're going to go through 6 different steps here today. And let's get into number 1. Identify and define the opportunity. So if you're on this webinar, you likely already understand the value of an intranet, but that doesn't mean what is obvious to you is obvious to everyone else, especially when you have a panel of decision makers in front of you. So personally, I've been an internal communications professional, so I understand firsthand the challenges associated with trying to get stakeholders on board for a new intranet and trying to get them to see the same value that you do. So before we go any further, you need to understand how or if the intranet you are proposing aligns with your business strategy. From there, you can work to align your intranet goals directly to your business strategy. So for example, if you are a large retail organization, your core business may be focused on selling and promoting your goods. So for your employees to excel at their job, they're going to require knowledge of the products and even some industry knowledge and insight. But where is this information currently located? And is it easily accessible and shareable? Or perhaps your business is a franchise and your franchisees need access to branded documentation and collateral to maintain your corporate look and feel. Where are your franchisees currently accessing these resources? And how can you ensure they are using updated collateral? So once you envision how your proposed intranet can align with your business strategy, it's time to come up with actual intranet objectives. These objectives can come from multiple sources such as focus groups, online surveys, but regardless of where they come from, there are typically 5 reasons why organizations pursue intranet software. So number 1, knowledge management, because people are seeking an opportunity to capture, organize, and diffuse knowledge. Number 2, communication. People require a platform to disseminate news and important announcements. Number 3, collaboration. People want and need a centralized platform for teams and projects to succeed. Number 4, employee engagement. People might be looking for a virtual location for personal employee interaction, especially right now. And number 5, business efficiency. People want to automate tasks and processes. So if we look closely at each one of these elements individually, we can see exactly how an intranet makes a positive impact. So knowledge management. Almost every company struggles with isolated knowledge. And according to a study by the IDC, employees spend approximately 2.5 hours per week searching for people and information within the company, which costs companies on average of $7,000 per employee per year. So for an organization of 500 employees, that equates to $3.5 million. So how does an intranet help? An intranet is an effective intranet will break down communication barriers. So by enabling people, information, and processes to come together, employees have access to more tools and information and people to effectively do their job. Then there's communication. So a typical knowledge worker spends 7 hours per week reading, sorting, and replying to emails. This equates to about 432 hours or 54 days per year. So 1/3 of this time is spent on questionable tasks like reading reply all messages, reverse engineering email threads, and trying to locate attachments. How does an intranet help? An intranet helps reduce email usage as informal discussions now move to the intranet platform where information is conveniently captured and stored. This information then becomes searchable and browsable, creating a knowledge repository the entire business can benefit from. Now we move on to collaboration. As more and more businesses offer telecommuting and remote working environments, we can no longer rely solely on in-person collaboration. So whether it's through documentation or discussions, an intranet helps reduce unnecessary meetings or incorrect or outdated document versions. Employee engagement. So highly engaged business units achieve an estimated 10% increase in customer metrics and a 20% increase in sales. So in other words, an engaged culture improves performance, not the other way around. So an intranet is a great tool for combining professional and social in a way that enhances your organization's culture and employee engagement. It's also a great way to surface communities of practice within your organization.
Can I just add one thing there, Kelly?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when we do a lot of sales calls here, and usually when people are outlining their objectives and purposes for the intranet, the top ones, like pre-COVID, was always knowledge management, communication around content. So that was usually the big purpose of the intranet. Now with COVID hit, everyone's working from home. Employee engagement has really surfaced up as to be one of the top objectives for the intranet, because you lose kind of like those water cooler chats, and now that's all taking place online. So employee engagement is definitely a big one that we're seeing.
Cool. I mean, that's so interesting to see how much that's changed in the last year as well.
Yeah.
And so finally, we look at business efficiency. From operations and customer service to regulatory management, processes are imperative to organizational efficiency and sometimes even safety. So, however, because many of us perform these tasks in a sort of perfunctory way, we may not always be accomplishing these as quickly or as efficiently as we could be. So by streamlining processes and simplifying access, intranets can deliver huge value. So things like vacation request forms or other common workflows can easily be automated from within the intranet. So pretty much any department you have will have objectives that can be achieved through an intranet. So here are the main objectives that people typically focus on, but yours may be a little bit different. So as you can see, a department like customer service may have an objective of reducing call handling times. Well, an intranet can play a huge role by providing a centralized database of information. Or if we look at an executive team, they need to keep employees focused, especially right now. And so they need to keep employees focused on organizational objectives. A lot of us are working from home right now, and this is just, as Colton said, I mean, it's a lot different than it was a year ago. So it's important that employees have access to shared goals and strategies. And if you're still unsure about your objectives, run a survey. We run surveys all the time here at Thought Farmer, and they are a great way to collect feedback on a wide variety of workplace issues. I've heard people say the term survey fatigue, but personally, I love surveys because I get excited when my input is valued. So if you run a survey to help determine your intranet objectives, you will likely see the same pains and frustrations that led you to first consider purchasing an intranet. And this becomes super valuable because you can go back to your stakeholders to show them the collective frustrations your colleagues are feeling too. And if you don't know what questions to include in your survey, consider asking things like, are you able to keep up with your current email load? Are you satisfied with the length of time it takes to complete an internal form? Are you aware of the projects other colleagues and departments are working on? Do you feel as though internal collaboration can be improved? Or where do you currently access important internal information? And I believe we actually have a few blogs on that discuss running surveys. I could think of 2 for sure. So perhaps we can include that in the post-webinar follow-up. So that brings us to our next point, measuring success. So drawing on the objectives we've already outlined, it's now time to look closer and determine what goals you want your intranet to help you achieve. As mentioned before, you are likely to be asked what the tangible outcome of a proposed intranet is. And as great as stronger employee engagement is, your decision makers are going to expect something more concrete and measurable. Most people understand the value of employee engagement, improved communication, collaboration, and increased knowledge share. But unfortunately, measuring these things is a different beast. Not that it's not possible, but it's certainly not as obvious of a measurement as something like accounting software. So we talked in part 1 about the common reasons most organizations choose to acquire intranet software. Now let's look at each one of these how each one of these objectives can be measured. And this will not only help reinforce the frustration that likely got you to this point, but it will also help your decision makers recognize the specific outcomes of what you are proposing. So I won't go through every single one of these, but if we look at the first one, for example, the objective of knowledge management, this can be measured by baselining how employees share new ideas and then measuring once an intranet is in place. You could also measure how many of these ideas were implemented. Discussion forums are ideal for generating ideas. So with an overall objective of increase the amount of knowledge share, target KPIs can be employees are sharing knowledge or employees are commenting on content. Or we can look at the objective of employee engagement and workplace culture. We often think of culture and employee engagement as this touchy-feely thing that can't be measured. However, what happens when your employees feel engaged and included in a strong culture? They stay longer. So in other words, you can relate your objectives to employee turnover. Include how turnover is currently calculated, what it is now, and then associated reduction of cost by lowering it. So over to you, Colton.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. All right, that was a super smooth transition there. Can everyone see my screen okay? I'm mainly asking you, Kelly.
I see. Yes, I see your screen perfectly.
Perfect, sounds good. Awesome, so now we've kind of taken one step closer to getting the buy-in. We've identified the why at this stage. Now we got to take a look at some of the risks. So a good way to help you identify your risks is just to reiterate your goal. So what is our aim? And then what is going to get in the way of achieving that goal? So risks, they're anything that's going to derail your main objectives. So if your pitch to the group is, here's our main goal, our intranet is going to enhance employee engagement, increase internal communications, increase the findability of company content and employee resources, really to make it easier for you, your staff and your team to get your job done. So with that in mind, we'll cover these four areas of risk here, starting with regulatory requirements. This is going to depend on your industry. You might have additional considerations to address that will go beyond the typical business case. For example, if you are industries such as finance, healthcare, government especially, you might be subject to increased level of compliance and restrictions that may really impact your project. So some companies might require a lot of vendors to jump through a lot of hoops here. So we receive RFPs all the time. Some of them are just pages and pages of questions. One funny one was one requirement was to present the actual demo need to be in French. So we said, "Are you sure we don't speak French?" They said yes, and okay, we had to bow out of that one. So they really limited themselves for that competitive landscape and supply. So that's something to consider. Next one is hosting requirements there. Are you going to deploy on-premise or are you going to deploy on cloud? So the company you're with, they might actually require an on-premise deployment. They want to keep everything in-house. 5 years ago, that might have been the case. It was pretty popular. It was more of a 75-25 split in favor of on-premise, especially in the financial industries. It's now moved to more of a 60-40 split in favor of cloud. So it's slowly becoming more old school. With cloud computing being everything it is, cloud-based solutions, they tend to have lower occurrences of downtime, fewer open support tickets, compared to on-premise, a lot of less IT resources needed for cloud versus on-premise. Updates, upgrades, they can be rolled out remotely and instantly, limiting that impact on business ops. So yeah, some vendors offer cloud solutions, others, both. So it is a good question to ask IT up front, and definitely add that to the list of questions for your vendors there. Next one here is estimated costs. So where's the money going to come from? Are these funds available, or will they be shifted from another allocation? Obviously, the new software will have some associated costs that your stakeholders will expect. This is very important to first estimate that amount of money and hours that you might need to complete the project. With costs, there's two basic costs. So there's license fees, and then there's professional services. In most cases, the professional services, these are like the implementation fees to get you help you launch. But it is a good idea to get those can be optional, but it is a good idea to kind of get those costs there. Last one here, the other risk. So we talked about various potential risks related to getting your internet project off the ground. The other risk worth mentioning is the risk of doing nothing at all. So go back to your original objectives outlined in section 1. Envision how each department could be impacted by avoiding an intranet altogether. So for example, Kelly talked about how Intranet can benefit the sales team by providing them with that central location for access to that critical and up-to-date sales documentation. I don't know what I would do without our Intranet. Accessing our sales proposals and all that stuff is just super efficient for me. But consider how the sales team could be adversely affected by not having the Intranet. So more time spending locating documents, incorrect document versions, when they could be spending more time trying to close the deal. So that same scenario can be applied through other departments as well. So maybe you're a member-facing employee at a credit union. You're trying to help a member open up a savings account or a checking account. That findability and having those documents, having those SOPs, those instructions, those proposals at your fingertips is really going to empower your staff in a big way. It's going to make a big impact for them and the company as a whole. Next section here is all about identifying your stakeholders. So how an Intranet is going to help your department and roles and your goals within each department. It is a team decision. It does affect everybody in the company. It's not like an HR tool or a sales tool that's just needed for the sales team. People use it in a very similar way to accomplish their unique goals, both as an individual as well as department goals. So determine those stakeholders, who are responsible for signing off on the project. It's a super critical step in building your business case. It's when you want to do early as well. So before you do the evaluations, the demos, the trials, whether it's an RFP, figure out those stakeholders. We've seen some projects get off the ground pretty quickly and get further down the road, even shortlisting vendors, and then IT figures out what's going on, and they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" what about this? What about that? And they have their considerations. So it might be tempting to underestimate this step or maybe skip it altogether. But identify these individuals early in the process really ensures that someone's voice, they won't voice their concerns too late, which could potentially derail your project or catch you off guard. So who are these people? What are the concerns? What are the requirements? These stakeholders, they could be team members who are directly engaged in the project. They could also be external consultants brought in to manage the project and make recommendations. They could also be end users who play that critical role. So there also might be different stakeholders throughout the life of your intranet as well. Typically, an intranet really depends on your size, and the scope of the company will involve someone from IT, HR, comms, and the executive team. So it is important to understand which stakeholder also has the most influence over the success of your project. So whose opinion is going to hold the most weight? Who's going to be your largest supporter, and then who's going to be your biggest opponents, because you will have big opponents there as well. So, but think of it as a partnership. So rather than telling them like this is the way it's going to be, this is the approach, you can get off to a rocky start that way. Makes them feel out of the loop, and instead go to them with questions and seek advice. How do I do this? What are your thoughts on this? I think my wife has this figured out. Whenever she doesn't know how to do something or doesn't want to do something, she's always like, oh, how do I do this? I don't know how to do this. Help me out. And I'm always like, yeah, let's do solutions. Let's roll up my sleeves. I don't know, it might be a guy thing, but actually listen and ask, what are your requirements? What features do you have in mind? What does the internet look in 5 years? So that line of questioning, that alignment can really go a long way. So what are the concerns? Presuming your stakeholders fall into kind of those 4 categories that I mentioned earlier: IT, HR, comms, execs. Let's take a closer look at each, starting with the IT team here. So IT, they are an interesting group. They're always going to need their stamp of approval for the internet project. It's something we found if you do have an IT team. So this group, they do have some important concerns that need to be considered. One question they'll have is, what is our involvement in the project? They might come from something like SharePoint, something that's built in-house that requires a lot of heavy IT involvement. Maybe they're looking to offload site setup, content, group creation within the site. I don't want to be involved every time someone from HR wants to spin up a discussion forum. So I want more of a hands-off, kind of the better approach. So what you're doing is really removing that burden for them. That could be a big need for them. Another ask that might help them is user authentication. So provisioning, deprovisioning of those users, just fancy words for adding and removing people from the site on the employee directory there. So does it integrate with AD? That's going to make their life a lot easier. They're going to ask about hosting environment. Is this on-premise? Is it cloud? If it's cloud, what are their certifications? SOC 2 environment. What's the disaster recovery and business continuity plan look like? Where's the location of the data center? All that good stuff. And lastly, just the overall security of the internet solution that you're proposing to them. Down the road, this actually more so looks like a separate call between your vendor technical and security team, as well as the IT team there. So some things to consider for the IT group. Next here we have human resources, HR. So they have a big mandate of ensuring the hiring, retention, the overall happiness and enjoyment of the employees. HR does have a big interest in the success of the internet platform. So discuss elements such as employee onboarding, employee engagement, workplace culture. One of the biggest things that we find they're looking for is that central place to store employee handbooks, benefit information, policies. It's kind of that static legacy documentation that doesn't change very much. So if you think about it, like every single person in your company has HR questions. I think I ask my HR team a question every other week. And if you can get as much of that on the internet as possible, that's going to be a huge win for them. So if they can't if they can't find what they're looking for, we actually have this great section on our site. It's who to ask for what, and it's just a list of tasks. So who to ask about vacation, who to ask about expenses, and we actually link that person with their employee profile right to their contact information. So it's super easy to manage that. This is our intranet, by the way. Here it's called Sparky, and we're a pretty fun social group. I know the team likes to use the the photo galleries to put our photos on here. Next one here, internal comms. So they're going to be a huge driver of the Intranet project. Some of the more successful implementations are led by comms. They're always looking for ways to reach staff, stand out from all the noise. There's a lot of noise out there right now. Everything is being offered in digitally. And if you're talking to them, ask them like, what is your primary channel for communication? Are you able to get reports? Are you able to measure engagement on those means of communication? These comms professionals, they're really going to desire the tools and the processes that allow them to disseminate important corporate information, those news, employee information, and discuss with them how the Intranet will impact their ability to reach staff and ensure those messages are read. Onto the C-suite here, numbers are going to be key for them. So as long as you really focus on decreasing costs and increasing revenue, you're really speaking their language. For example, rather than saying, we need a document collaboration solution, position it like we are spending way too much on challenges related to poor documentation, collaboration. Here's what we're proposing to fix that. And back it up by numbers too. So you saw Kelly's notes earlier in her slides, spending 2.5 hours per week searching for people, information, costing over 3 million per year. You could even reduce that in a conservative approach and say 1 million. That's still something to think about. And also add in here, really get a sense of your maybe it's a CEO as at C-level. Get a sense for the personality, or anybody really. Are they direct, analytical, data-driven decision makers? Maybe they're more relatable, fun. They care about employee engagement and culture. So say they're the latter, present them with screenshots, CEO blogs, that kind of seeing that two-way conversation engagement happening really gives them a vision to see how the Intranet is gonna be like. Last one here is end users. So successful implementations do engage the end users in the evaluation phase of the Intranet. So think about their use cases. How will they interact with the software? One person might want to be in the field and they're looking on their phone. They're trying to find information all day. And the other one might be at a desk helping member service calls. And then another user could be on the product team, actually creating those SOPs, creating those instructions for those folks, for those teammates. So accessibility is important for them. So your end users, they might not actually get a vote in the Intranet vendor you choose, but definitely a lot of times they're brought into the last demo when you've shortlisted a couple of vendors there. Sometimes the demos have about 10 to 40 end users in there, and they do get an opinion there. So definitely don't lose sight of that communication, that knowledge share, that employee engagement that really affects every single department. And if you don't address their concerns from the start, you really risk that low engagement with your new Intranet. All right, so on to outlining your project plan. So for the project plan, it's a formal document designed to guide and control the execution of the project. It outlines the scope, the schedule, responsibilities, just in a single place, so it's easy to see for everybody. If you already determined a potential vendor, now is a really good time to inquire about the proposed project plan. For example, do they offer professional services? So if so, you're going to need that to include that within your project plan. So we'll talk about the three factors here, or the first three factors in the project plan, starting with the scope. So what are the requirements for a successful project? In the other stages, it's really important to have Intranet workshop, like the strategy, and the team is really going to get a good understanding of the main objectives, and these objectives are really going to align with your future KPIs that you're going to look at. Are there any timeline constraints that will impact the amount of work that can be completed? A client of ours had this amazing 4-month implementation plan in January, and it was going to be great. They're going to take all this time. It's going to set up the site beautifully. Everything's going to be where it's going to be. And COVID hit, and they said, darn, we got to launch in 4 weeks. We need to get this up and running. So they were super flexible and adaptable to make it work there. So they did a phased approach, which seemed to be better for them. Tasks and milestones. So what are the phases and deliverability of the project, and is each phase and deliverability broken down into manageable tasks? So we're talking about the stuff that gets done to launch the site. It's kind of like hosting a party. Get everything ready before people show up. Kind of a bad example because it's COVID, and then people start showing up, or you invite them to the site, so to speak. So it's the building out of the site. There's about 4 or 5 main phases. So there's the content strategy, information architecture, the validation of that architecture, the site structure, training, any governance and workshops happening, and then lastly, the content migration. All this stuff alone could be its own webinar, and I think we do have some content around that as well. What resources are needed internally for each phase and activity? So who's needed for what? For instance, IT will probably be more involved in installation, actually getting users onto the site for authentication. Have you included milestones for your team to work towards to celebrate wins during the project? This is super important. So obviously, like launching the intranet is important, but there might be other wins along the way that you want to celebrate. I come from a hockey background, Canadian, play hockey, of course, and in the hockey playoffs there are about three series until you go on to the final series. I don't know if you watch the NHL, but whenever you win a series in the playoff, even if you win like the Western Conference, they get a trophy. It's like a pretty big trophy, big deal. But a lot of times they're not even celebrating. They have like stern look on their face. They don't even touch the trophy, and they skate off the ice, like zero celebration until they actually win the Stanley Cup. Baseball, for instance, is totally different. Like they are, if they even make the playoffs, they're like popping champagne. They got the goggles on. They're spraying it everywhere, and every series is like that too. And Kelly could attest to that. She's a big baseball fan. The next one is labor and resources. So what kind of labor and hours are being involved? How many people are involved? What is their availability on the project? And think about the stakeholders. So oftentimes, like the project manager, if they're involved in the evaluation stage there, it's often 50% of their time. Once it's launched, there's a bit of a handoff that happens and it becomes more of a side of the desk. Or you might have a distributed governance model at that point for your site going forward. I will say though, someone will need to own this project because there's a lot of wrangling that's going to happen of content and people, and that can often be a pitfall if not clearly defined there. Next 3 here are scheduling, training, and cost. So starting with the scheduling here, what is the proposed timeline? What is the launch date? Are your estimates achievable? So a standard is to set aside about 3 to 4 months for the launch of your project. That's a good kind of time frame there. Does your project plan account for dependencies? So maybe Active Directory needs to be cleaned up prior to launching the site. That's going to depend on IT. Are there any tasks that can be completed in parallel with setting up the site? Think about the theming and design of the site. That can probably be done. Have you considered time required for time-intensive tasks, such as content inventory, audit, and content migration? Yeah, typically this can be a big one. Content migration itself can take up to 28 days. So that's something to think about as well. Training. So have you included the necessary product training to ensure that your team is ready to use the new intranet? Yeah, so think about content manager training, end user training. It is something we put a lot of thought into. One of our biggest goals by far is how do we create the easiest user experience possible? So both from an end user perspective and from a content manager perspective. And does your team have the skills and expertise needed to launch the new site, to launch the intranet? So be realistic, be honest, and you know, there might be areas that you can tap, that you might want to tap our team, professional services team there. They have a pretty deep knowledge. Whatever vendor you go with actually will have a pretty deep knowledge of the product. So some areas you might want to do yourself, and other areas you might want to hand over, like maybe it's the information architecture. You know, I want you to come up with this plan, and you know, we can handle the theming or something like that. So for us, from a thought farmer perspective, we totally understand, and we can tailor that approach that works best for you down the road. Lastly, here we have costs. So will there be hourly costs? Sometimes they might be paid up or services paid as services rendered. From our perspective, we do services rendered. So if you say, okay, we want to allocate 170 hours for this project, we're only actually going to bill you for the hours needed and what you use. So take that into consideration when you're digging into more of the contract side of things. So while it isn't necessary, it's definitely not a bad idea to create your project plan with a spreadsheet or a specific project planning template, and that too just gives people some visual there to look at. All right,
Thank
Kelly.
you. I'm not seeing. Oh, there we go. I think I'm gonna have to go through all those things that you just said.
Okay.
Just bear with me 1 second. So yeah, this is my favorite part. The final step in the business case is revealing your plan. So the first thing we recommend is picking a format. There are many different ways to present your plan. Some of you may choose to keep it simple and stick with a PDF document, while others may want to construct an elaborate video and PowerPoint presentation. Remember that beautifully illustrated data can go a long way in persuading your audience, but overwhelming slides with unnecessary details can bore or even confuse them. So in the end, one method is not better than the other. You know your audience best, so we encourage you to choose the format that will resonate with them the most. Number 2, lead with the need. So start by describing the purpose or pain point the intranet will be addressing. So no matter how well researched and innovated the solution, you likely won't get support from the audience if the need isn't clear. So ask yourself, what is the message I am trying to convey? Number 3, tell a story. This is my favorite. Facts and figures are great, but a strong narrative will really connect your audience on a deeper emotional level. So don't be afraid to share all the frustrations and challenges you feel contributed to your intranet journey, and let them know why you began this quest and how you arrived at your decision. You might even want to create a hypothetical narrative and invite your audience into a scenario of how a new intranet could benefit and impact employees. Number 4, anticipate objections. So imagine that you're in the room with an executive team. You can feel your message resonating. You're so close to successfully making your pitch. And then out of nowhere, one of them drops a bomb in your presentation and asks a question you were not expecting. You do your best to answer, but in spite of your efforts, you realize your audience now has doubts. I've totally been in this scenario before. So yes, there will be questions, and yes, there will be objections, but don't let them derail your business. Like, don't let them derail your business case. Like, you need to be ready for all the expected and unexpected questions that may come your way. So stay confident in your business case. So an objection may be, why should we invest in a new intranet when employees rarely visit the existing one? So I think we get this a lot. Adoption is a huge and a very valid concern. So be sure to convey why any previous platforms were not adopted and how you plan to overcome that with a new intranet. Better yet, have an adoption plan already in the works. This is a good time to provide strong data that supports your argument. Another common objection is, can we afford this? So cost is typically the number one objective and a critical metric for CIOs or anyone else overseeing budgets. The initial setup and cost to require technology as well as expenses to maintain it are important measures of success and provide a benchmark for calculating a return on the proposed improvements. It's important that you articulate not just why you can afford it, but also the potential cost of not pursuing a platform. And finally, include references. The right vendor will likely have an assortment of case studies that speak to various verticals and markets. So select a few included in your presentation. Not only will this demonstrate the vendor's credibility, but it will also outline how organizations similar to yours overcame specific challenges with their intranet. So that's it. If this entire process looks like a lot of work, it's because it is. Building a solid business case is an in-depth process, but it has its merits. Arming yourself with relevant research data and options is the most compelling way to present a clear argument to win over any skeptics. In other words, investing the time and effort will almost always result in a positive outcome. So as we mentioned before, we have a white paper on our website that you can download to learn more. And I believe in that white paper, if I recall correctly, there's even a template to like a Google Slides type presentation. So we've made it even easier for you to present with that template. So yeah, I think we probably have a few questions we can take. Colton, I'm sure you can probably help answer some of these. How long does it take to build the business case, and how many folks should be involved in building a business case?
Yeah. How long? It really depends. If you're having those conversations, I'd probably give it at least a couple weeks to 3 weeks, give or take a week or so. As far as people involved, it probably won't be a ton of people involved. Might be just one or two. So if you're leading the project there, it might take one or two people. You probably at this point you probably don't want to involve a ton of people to build the business case, because you're selling it to those different folks. So it's probably just a pretty short group there.
Okay. Susan's wondering, have you ever seen someone use this format and were they successful? I believe I know that I've heard stories of people using this, but perhaps you can speak more to that.
Yeah, same here. I think I've heard some stories, definitely people using this. It's definitely a good, it's good information to have and to present, especially now. There's none of that. Well, some people are in the office, but just to have this framework in your mind as you're, I was going to say as you're having those like water cooler chats, but those are kind of gone now. But I think especially this, you might be presenting online and using this template to present to people now. That might be a kind of a better format of what we're seeing these days. So yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Lisa is wondering, how much does an average intranet cost, and does cost increase with complexity? What are the major factors that influence cost?
Yeah. The average cost of an intranet really depends on your, so the cost will depend on a couple factors. Both is, are you going to do a cloud deployment on premise? And the other is how many staff do you have? So typically products will price in tiers. So if you have 1,000 staff, it'll be a lower cost per user. And then if you have 100 staff, it's going to be probably higher cost per user there. So that's definitely something to consider. I will say though, now is a really good time to buy an intranet because cost-wise, because like Kelly said, that is a big objection. Cost-wise, you can get some pretty good deals with it being, everything being that it is today, as well as the end of the year. So definitely ask for some better prices. It just gives you a bit of negotiation for some discounts there.
Okay, thanks. One more question I think we got time for. Stephen's wondering, how long does it take from signing a contract to launch? So I guess timelines he's looking for information on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as soon as you sign a contract, the actual physical site can be installed within a couple of days, really, just depending on time of both your team there and ours. And after that, it's about 3 to 4 months, give or take. The biggest thing again is going to be your content migration. So if you have a lot of content to migrate over to the new site, that's going to be your going to take the most time there.
Okay, so we're just going to be mindful of everyone's time here. I know I had only allotted a few minutes for Q&A. I know there's a few more questions, but we're more than happy to follow up individually. I just want to take the time to thank everyone who attended. Like we said, there's a lot of information covered here. So if something doesn't make sense, please reach out. Mm-hmm. Download the white paper for more information. And thank you, Colton, for joining me on this webinar mm-hmm. on such short notice too.
Yeah, no worries. And I'd say too, The way we prepare content, Thought Farmer prepares content is through the lens of the full buying cycle of an intranet. So this is really stage one, like selling it to your team. Like, we need an intranet, and I really encourage you, as you go through the evaluations, please continue to use us as a resource. After you get approval for the project, we have the Intranet Buyer's Guide, for example. It's a workbook. We have webinars. If you ever want a demo or a trial site, or just want a call to kind of go through some of this stuff, I'm more than happy to go through that. I think my calendar link might be somewhere there, it might not be, but definitely feel free to reach out. To us as a resource through that project there.
Right, and I think I mentioned a few resources throughout this webinar, so we will include links to those in the post-webinar follow-up. So again, thanks to everyone who joined. Thank you, Colton. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.